Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm going to be your host for round about the next 45 minutes. I think it should be 45 minutes maximum as well. Depends how many questions we get along the way. But welcome along to this afternoon's webinar. It's for Sage 50 accounts, and we're getting back to basics today, looking at transaction grouping, helping you to understand why transactions group and also why they don't. So that's what we'll be looking at in today's session. A little bit of housekeeping just before we get started though. So as normal, if you're new to webinars, you don't need a microphone. If you've got one and you do enable it as you join, then you will find that you're muted automatically and you can't unmute yourself during the session. So that means if you have any questions for us today, then you'll need to pop them into the questions panel. To access that, you just need to click the little speech bubble icon, give it a click, it'll expand, you'll get access to that box in the bottom corner where you can start typing. So any comments or questions, pop them in there. Remember to click send. We've got Matt on hand today. He's on red alert just to try and answer any of those questions that you might have. So you might get a straightforward answer, you might get a link to one of our help articles, or if it's a bit more complex or maybe off topic, he might refer you to get in touch with our support team. If anyone wants a copy of today's slides, those are available to download. Again, using the little icon on your toolbar. Two versions of those. There's the standard full color version, and there's what we term the print friendly version with all the colors stripped out. So do take that opportunity if you do want them during today's session. Now, as normal, the session is being recorded. A link to the recording will be included on your follow-up email. So if you want a bit of a recap, or you get called away early, or maybe it's a really nice day where you are, so you just think, I'm going to finish work early, I need to log off, then just watch out for that email coming. You can get a bit of a recap from that. On that email, we'll also include a link to our upcoming webinars. We'll tell you a little bit more about some of those towards the end of the session, and there'll also be a link to our previous recordings as well. So you'll get that email around about an hour after we finish today. Right, okay, let's have a look at what we're covering in today's session. So it doesn't look much, the agenda in today's session. I've beefed up the introduction area just so it looks a little bit bigger. So we've got an introduction where we're going to talk about the criteria that need to be met for transactions to group. So it's not much, but it catches people out here and there. It'll help you understand how you can make transactions group or avoid them grouping. We'll talk a little bit about headers and splits, explain a little bit about what those are. You may have heard about those. If you contact our support team, they might refer to that as well. So we'll just explain what those are. We're then going to run through a series of demonstrations. Now, I've got quite a few demonstrations today, so once we switch across, it'll nearly just be demonstration from that point. Just at the end, we'll explain more about the additional support, and if there are any outstanding questions, we'll hang around and try and pick up as many of those as we can. But do keep them coming. You don't have to wait till the end. So if you see something in the background you're not sure about, or maybe you don't quite get something, let us know. Just pop that comment in there, but don't wait until the end and then put them all through at once. So we'll try our best to pick them up though. Right, okay, let's get started then. So a little bit of an introduction, first of all, to transaction grouping. So the basics are for transactions to group in Sage, and this catches a lot of people out and get loads of support queries when people are initially new to Sage, where they'll contact our support team and they'll say, right, why can I only see this transaction, or why do all of those transactions show separately? So it's understanding how the grouping works in Sage, that's the key. So transactions will be grouped when they're entered at the same time and they meet specific criteria. Now, the basic criteria for transactions to group is that they must be posted to the same account. So for instance, if it's a bank transaction, it uses the same bank account. We'll see that when we look at bank payments later. Or if it's let's say you're entering a batch of customer invoices or supplier invoices, it's the same customer or supplier account. They must be dated the same and they must have the same reference. So that's the three bits of criteria when you're entering transactions: account, date, and reference. And the transactions must be consecutive as well. So if you are entering them in a batch screen, they must be consecutive on that list before you click save. Now, if you save between transactions as well, that will mean that they're essentially not consecutive on the batch entry screen, so it will split them as well. So if any of that above criteria is different or it's left blank, so for instance, if you leave the reference blank, then transactions will not group. So that's your key: account, date, and reference. And you'll see that throughout the session today. Now, that concept is pretty simple, but there are little alternatives and little rabbit holes you can go down with a few of the settings. So that's what we're going to look at over the next 40 minutes or so. Now, when you post a transaction and you go into the likes of a supplier record, you've got what you would term headers and what you would term splits. So you may read this if you're looking at support articles, or maybe you're speaking to someone on our support team. Now, when a transaction is grouped, and we'll see this in a moment when I start posting some transactions. So if you think about an invoice, it can have many items on it. So if you imagine all of those invoice items added together, that's what you would term your header transactions. So a total of all the individual parts. So when you're looking at the likes of a supplier record, you're looking at the activity, for instance. In the top box, it displays what you would term the header information. So that top level information. So in this case, as you can see on the example there, it just shows one purchase invoice in the top box, and that's for £420. In the bottom box, however, it shows the breakdown of what's on that invoice. It shows the splits. So in this case, there's two splits, there's two lines. So when we've entered that invoice as a batch invoice, we've entered the two parts, would have had the same account reference, the supplier, same date, and same reference. Doesn't matter about anything else. Doesn't matter whether the nominal code's different, the tax code's different, the values, the details. Doesn't matter about any of that. It's the fact that it's the same account, same date, same reference. Then when you save it, it should group it together. So the individual parts are what you would term the splits. Now, if you just entered one item, it would be one header, one split, so 1-to-1. But you can have one header with multiple splits, so the individual items contained on that invoice. So obviously you may have in the top box, you may have a number of what you would term headers. So each time you post a transaction, it's going to show in the top there. But when you highlight it in that top box, it will then display the breakdown in that bottom, and it might actually show you a bit more information as well as and when transactions are paid off. So it would show you sort of the allocated transactions against that. We're not going to go into that today, just the basics of the grouping of the transactions. Now, so you can see that throughout the program, we've got loads of demonstrations planned for you. So we're going to start with invoices and credits. So it seems like the logical place to start. We'll just run through this sort of demonstration agenda. So I'll switch to my screen and we'll get stuck into those demonstrations rather than going back and forwards. So we're going to start with invoices and credits, and we'll enter a new invoice. I'll select the customer. I'll just choose the first one on the list there. And we'll enter or choose some products. Doesn't really matter what they are. I'll pop in some prices for them as well. So it's just to try and demonstrate this for you. So we'll do a slightly different value for that one. And let's do a third one as well. Again, doesn't really matter what it is. And I'll save that. So there's 3 items added up, comes to £285.60. So we'll just save that. Now, if I update this one to the ledgers, so I'll just quickly let it do that and close out. Now, if we pop into transactions, first of all, what we will see is at the bottom here, we've got the individual items. Let me just make sure I've got no filter applied here. All right down to the bottom. There we go. So we got the individual items listed in transactions. So we see the equivalent of what you would term the split transactions listed. But if we pop into customers, we pop into the customer record. Actually, we'll just go direct to the activity. And what we can see on this one, the last transaction, it shows what you term the header transaction. So 1356, which is the first transaction number of those three that's going to be displayed. But obviously there are three parts, so still three individual transactions, but this top box displays what they term the header information. So the top level showing you the total of that invoice. And when we highlight this line, in the bottom box, it shows us the breakdown, so the individual splits, which in turn have their own transaction numbers. It shows you things like obviously the date's going to be the same, the reference is going to be the same, nominal code, it's the same in this instance, but it could be different. Departments could be different, tax codes could be different, details, and obviously values as well. It's all to do with the account reference, the date, and the reference itself. So on an invoice, you're always going to have that. So it's for the same customer. There's one date on the invoice which all of the individual items use, and the reference, it would be the invoice number. So therefore it groups it. Now, if you're in the position where you don't have the split like this, it's just these two options at the top. You can hide the detail, in which case you just see the top level only. But if you show detail, you get the two boxes. So as you flick through it, it'll show you the individual breakdowns of those as well. Right, now if you pop into the customer receipt window, so we could have gone into bank accounts and customer receipts as well. And when we choose the customer receipts, and obviously we'll select the bank account, choose the relevant customer, so that first one on the list. Now in this instance, what we see is we just see in this case, what you term the header transaction. Now this can vary between VAT schemes, and the default setting can vary for this as well. But what we do have, so you might have an invoice where actually you've disputed one of the parts, or maybe one of the items has been returned now and you've subsequently received a credit note, so you do want to show that part as being paid. So what you can do, and this may be selected by default, it's this option here, list invoice stroke credit by item line. And if we do that, what we'll see now for invoice 89 is transaction 1356, 1357, and 1358. So we can go down and we can choose the individual parts of that invoice. Now that would be the same if we do a batch purchase invoice, and we do that in the same way. So as I say, we can, if we want to, we can say, right, we're paying in full that one. We're not going to pay the middle item. Maybe we're in dispute about that one, but actually we'll pay the last item in full. So that gives us a sales receipt of £141.60. However, if we just clear that for a moment and call up that account again, and where we've just got what you term the header transaction listed, because we haven't got that box ticked, it means that we could just, if we're not interested in the individual items on the invoice, we could just enter a value of £144, for instance, in that receipt column. And it would just pay off the first item. If there's any money left over, it would go to the second item, third item, etc. Now that little checkbox, this one here, easy enough to switch when you come into this screen. But if you've got a preference, maybe you always want it to be ticked, what you can do, if we just close out of that, we can go into settings and then down to bank defaults, and the setting is here, list invoice stroke credit by item line. If we tick that and just OK it, and then we go back into customer receipts, select the customer, and you can see this box is already ticked now, so that's the default setting. We can always switch it back off in the screen if we want to. Obviously some invoices can have, you can have hundreds of items on that invoice. So sometimes it's a little bit easier just to say, right, I'm paying this invoice in full, and you're doing it against one line as opposed to selecting the individual lines. So just to confirm that setting, if I just close out again, it was within settings, bank defaults, and it's this one here, list invoice stroke credit by item line. So it's not switched on by default, that one. And then obviously choose your default setting, choose OK, that's it done. Any questions so far? Remember, keep them coming, keep that busy. It's primed and ready with the answers for you. Right, we'll move on to suppliers, and we'll just quickly pick up on the batch invoice option at that point. So this would be the same for customers if we were doing it within the customers batch invoices. But I'm just going to show you a few different options in here, and we'll have a look at how they group or don't group. So we'll start with the first supplier on the list. So it's a CON001. I'll just use today's date, and I'll pop a reference in there of 123. Let's put test, and we'll say it's £100. Now, if we come down to the second line and we use the same details, just going to press F6 to copy it down. So essentially those first three main bits of information that you would enter, the account, the date, and the reference, they are the same. And we'll just put, I'll put parts on that one. And we'll just say £200 for that. So when I save that, close out, if we go into the supplier activity, you'll see that just like it showed on the customer activity a moment ago, we've got one header transaction for the full value, but with that one highlighted, we can see the breakdown. So the two items that are on invoice 123. Now, when it comes to entering transactions, you might not even want to be that specific. You might just enter an invoice and you might just enter it all as one item anyway. So that negates that sort of position. Let's see another one. So we'll do batch invoice again. We'll do it again on that concept account. So this time I'll do 124. Let's do test again. £100. We'll come down to the second line. So I'll just press F6 a few times. Now this time I'm going to give it a different reference. And again, I'll say that's £100. So we've got two which are very similar, but they do have different references. So as you can probably imagine, going off what we've said so far, the main criteria is the account reference, the date, and the reference itself. So because one of those fields is different this time round, it won't group them. So we'll save it, close, have a look at the activity, and you'll see that the two transactions, so the one with reference 124 and 125, they're now listed at the top here as separate items. So what you would term separate header transactions. And obviously each of those header transactions, it just has one split, which just contains virtually identical information. Last one to quickly, well, actually two more to quickly mention. So if we do batch invoice again for that one supplier, if we leave the reference blank, I'll just put test and £100. And then again, just copy some information down. We'll leave that reference blank again. I'll just say test 2 for this one. Again, we'll do £100. Save it. Close. Into the activity. And as you can see, we've got two transactions. They're not grouped because there was no reference there. So again, it breaks them up. So again, we've got two header transactions. Final example I just want to quickly show you is if I go into the batch invoice one more time, I'll do 127 this time. Put a slightly different detail in there, £100. Now, what I'm going to do for this one is, let's say it's a 2-line invoice. So it's got the reference 127, that's what I want to give it. But I'm going to save it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter another one, also with the reference 127. Just say that's stock. We'll say £50 for that one. And again, at that point, I'll save that transaction. Now, if we go back to the activity at that point, so same supplier, and you'll see that it doesn't group them retrospectively. So again, that criteria, they've got a same account reference, same date, same reference number, and they've got to be consecutive. So if they're entered in a batch screen, they've got to be entered on that same batch screen consecutively before you click save. If you click save in between, it's going to split them. So it posts the transaction as one header, one split, and then it will do that for the second transaction as well. So if you want to dictate how transactions are grouped, that's a nice, easy way of doing that. So if you're in a batch and you want to break it up, you want it always showed separately, you can just either leave the reference blank or save it and then move on to the next part of that invoice. So that's the sort of the batch invoices. Batch credits would work in exactly the same way. And you've seen a customer receipt. Supplier payments would work in exactly the same way. Right, next we're going to move on to the banking area. Now the banking area works in pretty much the same way. So when I'm talking about the banking area, I'm talking about bank payments or batch bank payments and batch bank receipts. So it works with the same, essentially the same criteria. So same account, in this case it's the bank account, same date, same reference. So I'll quickly enter a batch of transactions. So I'll bank account 1200, I'll just accept today's date. I'll do 130 as my reference. I'll do nominal code 5,000. I'll just do stock, go £100. Come down to the next line. I'll do pretty much the same information. So nominal code, I can change that if I want to. I'll just do labour. And we'll say for this one, it's £50. Actually, I'll change the tax code for that one as well. It's going to make no difference. So essentially these transactions are going to group. So we'll save it. And if we go into transactions, again, just like all of the other areas, if we just refresh that, we've got the two transactions which are going to be displayed separately. Now, with bank transactions, a little bit different. So we'll just quickly pop into bank accounts first of all, have a look at the activity. Right down to the bottom, you can see here, it has grouped it. It's got that same criteria on the two transactions that were entered on the same screen, that were consecutive. We then clicked save, so it groups it together. That means when it comes to things like your bank reconciliation, which we're going to have a look at a little bit later on, it's going to group it as well. So we'd see, rather than the two individual items, we'd see one transaction, in this case, one bank payment for £170. It's a bit like if you, let's say you went to the supermarket and you spend so much on food, so much on clothing, maybe let's say you buy a TV. If the equivalent of you're putting that into your accounts, you might put those types of transactions against different nominal codes for analysis. So you want that broken down, but actually on your bank statement, you just see one amount going out. So that's sort of same sort of principle. That's why it's going to group that for you. Now there is a little change to the grouping as well on this one. So what we can do for this one, if you don't want it to group in that way, if we go into settings, bank defaults, this time there's another setting and it's this one here, group bank transactions. So With it switched on, the grouping works in the way that we've just described. But if you don't like it grouping transactions in that way, I can take the tick out of group bank transactions. What that then means, if we go back to, let's say, a bank payment, this time it won't use that criteria. So if we say 129, just say test, we'll do £100, we'll come down to the second line, and we'll enter virtually identical information. I'll put labour in this one. And again, I'll just do £50 and I'll save it. So ordinarily, grouping, it is going to group those transactions together, but we've taken the tick out of that setting within settings bank defaults, the one that says group bank transactions. So if we save that, close out, go into the activity for this bank account, you will actually see on this one that it has split them. And again, the other way we could have split them, even with that option switched on, is either making something different between those two transactions or entering the first line, saving it, entering the next line, saving it. Carolyn, you mentioned there, can you turn off the grouping for batch invoices? No, there's not an equivalent option for that one. But again, easy to get round. You either need to make something different on those three fields. Obviously, it's not going to be the customer. It's not going to be the date of the transaction. So either make something different in the reference or enter the first line, save it, enter the next one, save it. But with bank transactions, you do get that. You get that handy little setting. So just to remind you where it was, as I say, this is switched on by default. So settings, bank defaults, and it's this one here, group bank transactions. It can help with your bank reconciliation by having it ticked, enabling you to group transactions as well. Right, let's just for a moment pop back to the activity. So this one did group this one here for £170. That was 2 transactions. So 130. The 129, it didn't group because we deselected that option. So what that means is if we go into the bank reconciliation option, so if we go into reconcile, and we just OK that, and we'll just continue into the bank reconciliation, and I'll scroll right down to the bottom just so you can see it. So you can see it lists it as per the grouping that we've already mentioned. Now, it's not a massive problem if your transactions haven't grouped and you're thinking, oh, I wish they had, because you can easily select a number of transactions. So if you've got one transaction on your bank statement, let's say it's a payment for £180, your note relates to these two, with them highlighted, we can see it adds up to £180. So we can just say, right, that one on my bank statement, it's these two in Sage. So I'll highlight those two and I'll match them. I'll move them down to the bottom at the same time. Obviously, if it is grouped, just makes it that little bit easier. Now, I want to pick up on the final setting for you, and it's to do with the bank reconciliation screen as well. If I just discard that for the time being, and if we go back to settings and bank defaults, it's this option here, group items in bank rec. Now, what this is designed to do, this one, is let's say you've got 2 customers and there's different branches of the same company. But let's say you get paid by maybe a head office. Now, in that sort of scenario, what you can't do is you can't just show a full payment against one customer. You can't say, I want it to pay off that invoice on that customer's account as well. The way that you'd need to enter that would be as 2 separate customer receipts. So we'll quickly do that just for a moment. So we'll go into customers. We'll pick on this ABS and this Bob's Building Supplies, and I'll enter a batch invoice against each of them. Again, it doesn't really matter what they are. We'll put in these. Actually, it doesn't matter about the reference either in this instance. Put different references in. Put £100 against each of them, plus VAT. So we've got £120 against each of them. We'll save it. So we've now got some outstanding balances. So let's say we receive one payment from a head office and we want to enter that. So we need to enter the first part against the first customer. So we'll select that one. And we're going to say it's this one here. So we're going to pay that one in full. And we're going to give it a reference. I'll put my initials in there just so we can see it. So the reference is MC. We're using today's date as well. And we're paying that one off. Just ignore that message. Second one, so the second part of the payment received from that supplier, again, is against Bob's Building Supplies. So we'll pay off this one. And we'll give it the same reference and save it. Just make sure I did that one. Should have that customer. I didn't save it there. Try that one again. So customer receipts. I'll just pay that one in full. I think I clicked in the wrong column when I entered that. Let's just quickly save it again. So that's it done. So there's a customer receipt against each of the accounts there. So we can see them at the bottom, £120 against each of them. Now, if we go into the bank reconciliation window and just OK that and OK the various messages that we get on the way in, if we scroll down, those two transactions are shown separate. So this is where that additional setting can come in. And it means that I can group transactions from different accounts together. And it means that should then, in essence, it should be the same as my bank statement then. So this can sometimes help as well. So if I just close out of that, into settings, bank defaults, and I'm going to switch that option on. This option, it doesn't matter about when the transactions were entered on or what point it's switched on. I'm just saying right now, when I go into the bank reconciliation screen, I want those transactions to be grouped where possible. So we just OK that. We'll go back into the reconcile screen. And I'll ignore a few of these messages, go right down to the bottom. And this time you can see the transactions. It's going to group them for you. Put them back in numerical order. So you can see that one. I thought it had disappeared there for a second. So you'll see this time we've now got that one sales receipt listed for the combined value. And that's the same for that, the reference 129 as well, where previously it was split. But again, even if they are listed separately, that's not the end of the world. You can still, if you've got one transaction, it's £33, you can easily select the individual parts if they are listed individually. So again, for those transactions to group in that way in the bank reconciliation, they must have the same transaction type. So in this case, they were both sales receipt transactions, these ones at the bottom here. They must have the same date and same reference, and they must be consecutive as well on the activity of the account. So if I'd entered one, so the first sales receipt, and let's say my colleague's working away and they've entered a different type of transaction in between, or a transaction with a different reference, and then I go in and enter the second receipt, same date reference, it then wouldn't group that because they're not consecutive on the activity. Hope that makes sense. Just in case anyone's wondering as well with regard to making a selection, we sometimes get asked about this, where why can't I select more than one transaction at a time? So you might find when you're clicking, like I've done there, And I can just click away in my example, and it just highlights whatever I'm after. Whenever I click onto it, it highlights it. But what you might find is that when you're highlighting records, it just leaves one selected only. So that relates to, pop into tools and options. And on the environment tab, it's this list selection style option here. So if I go to the Windows selection style and then click OK, works a little bit different than if we go into the likes of the bank reconciliation. Let's just get these messages out of the way again. Go down to the bottom. So now when I'm highlighting, if I click onto this one that says best here, you'll see that as I click around, the highlight just follows me. So if you all want to select multiple records and you're getting that up, sort of yours is working in that way, you can either change the selection style within your software, tools, options, environment tab, go back to the Sage selection style, or alternatively, when you're working like this, what you can do is just hold down your control key. If I hold down my control key, I can highlight multiple records. So bear that one in mind. Just to confirm where that setting was, tools, options, on the environment tab, and obviously you can toggle between the two. That's going to be specific to your PC as well. So if you prefer one selection style compared to your colleague, they like to work on the Windows one, for instance, that's what they're used to, then that's absolutely fine. It's independent. So that will be held in a local, that setting's going to be held in a local file on your PC. So it's only going to affect you the way that you work. Right, there was a question about importing a little bit earlier as well. So the audit trail template. So with regard to import, this is a fairly new option, this one. When it comes to import, if you go to File and Import, let's say you were importing audit trail transactions. If you're on version 28 or above, you have the two options now. So you have an audit trail transactions grouped, but you must make sure you select the right option. Now what that means is if you imagine all your transactions, bear with me if you're not familiar with import, but we had a question on it from Carolyn. So, sorry, it was from Tracy, sorry. So when you're importing, you would have, let's say, all your transactions on an Excel document and you bring those in. Now historically, you would have had this top option only, and what that meant is when you import, none of the transactions would have been grouped. But these days you've got this option here. So version 28 or above, you've got the secondary option, audit trail transactions grouped. So when transactions are imported, if they meet the criteria, so again, same account, date, reference, it'll group those transactions together. If they don't meet that criteria, they'll just be listed individually as the import. So it's all to do with your version number. As you can probably imagine, Tracy, it was quite a common request, that one. Right, let's cancel out of that one as well. Final 2 points to cover. I want to quickly cover corrections. So if we're in transactions and we find a transactions where they are grouped together, let's find a one. So these one, some of these were grouped. So if we just pick on this one as an example, you got the two bank payments, the two parts. If we highlight that first part and go into edit, you can see you've got the header information listed here, and you've got the individual splits listed in the bottom here. If you need to amend something, so let's say that stock, maybe we keyed in the wrong value for that element, we just highlight the relevant split in that bottom section, the bit that says item line details. We would just edit that, and we can edit the individual item line. So let's say that should have been £80. We can amend the VAT as well to whatever that should be. So it's going to be 16. And then once we're done, we'll just click close, and then we'll click save. So do you wish to post these changes? Yes, we do. And that should be it done. Now what you will find, what it should post to the end of the audit trail, if I just refresh that, they've done it. Actually, it's not VAT reconciled yet, so absolutely fine. So it will enable me basically to essentially update that. Also on that one as well, if it doesn't matter which of the elements, so when it's a grouped transaction, it doesn't matter what part of which sort of the item line I highlight. So if I do the secondary item that was on that grouped invoice, again, go into edit, it still brings up the same screen. So it'll show you the number at the top of the first transaction in the group of transactions. And then it'll still list the individual items down here at the bottom. Final thing to quickly mention is, I just want to quickly mention reporting. So when it comes to reports, sometimes you'll want the breakdown, sometimes you won't. And again, it comes down to the style of the report. So if we just pick on this one, A1 Design Services, we'll pop into reports and we'll pop into the daybooks area. Now, normally the giveaway for reports as to what level of information it's going to show is when it says in brackets, summary or detailed. Summary would give you what you term the header level. So we'll just quickly display that one. Let's preview it. So we come down and we can see we got one with the reference 87, one with 88, one with 89. So that's the summary report. If we run the detailed report, this is where you're going to get the individual item lines. So again, we'll just run that. It's a longer report this time, a lot more information to show. And this time you can see, so for the one with reference 89, the invoice that I entered at the very beginning of the session, you can see the individual parts. So again, it depends on the level of detail that you want. I know you mentioned there, can you delete one of the bank payment lines if it's being grouped? You can't use the deletion option for that one, but what you can do is you could zero out one of the lines. It would let you do that, so achieving the same thing. So when you go through the deletion option, if you go back to corrections, so back to transactions, sorry, if we were to select just one part of that, so this, obviously these two are grouped together. So if I go via the delete option, you'll see that when we click delete, it doesn't matter what I select here, but when I click delete, it will delete all. It tells you there, by deleting the transaction, all linked transactions, etc., will be deleted. So those two are now flagged as both being deleted. If I wanted to get rid of an item where it is grouped, but I just want to get rid of one of the parts, that's when I need to go in and I could zero that down and then save the changes. So achieving what you're after. The alternative would have been to delete it and then just re-enter the parts that you require. But just going back to reports, you'll have similar reports available if you're in sort of bank accounts. If we do bank payments, let's try this one. Yeah, so things like a daybook bank payment summary or a daybook bank payment detail. So the giveaway is the word in the brackets there. The summary is the top level, the header information. With a detailed, it's going to show you this split information, so the individual item lines. Hope that makes sense. So those are the demos that we wanted to share with you today. So I hope you've found that of interest. Hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully it explains the grouping in a bit more detail. If you do have any questions for us, any final thoughts or questions that you want to pop in there, please submit them now. If you weren't quite with us at the beginning of the session, you just need to click the little speech bubble icon. Remember, the session is being recorded, so if you found it, sometimes some people will find the webinars quite quick, others will think, oh, well, I think I knew that, it's quite slow. Hopefully, you know, if you did find it a little bit quick, quite a bit to take in, don't worry, at least you've got the recording available. You get that link to it in around about an hour's time. Now, there is loads of supporting information available to you as well. Our Help Centre is a great resource, so do check that out, including more detailed information on things like headers, splits, also usages to throw into the mix as well. Loads of options. You can navigate through the help options. You can search for answers. Starting next week, new webinar that might interest you. It's Copilot. This is something you may have heard of. Sort of your digital AI assistant. So if you want to find out what that's all about, see if you'd be interested. Is it something you want to use? Is it not? So get yourself signed up. You can register. The link will be included on the follow-up email. We're going to be running a session of that starting next week. We'll be running it weekly thereafter. So if you want to find out how it can help you to manage debt, stock, monitor your business performance, help you identify any transactional processing issues, that type of thing, then please get yourself signed up. Link will be included on your follow-up email as well. And starting the week after, we've got our next digital badge that's available, and it's for management reports. Now, I've got a little video available, which I'll quickly play. This is just Matt, myself, and Jackie just telling you a little bit about what we're going to be covering in those sessions, but it'll help you understand, again, core accounting within Sage 50. So I'll set that away and I'll come back to you live in just a moment.
Exciting news, our next badge is available to book now. From April the 1st to the 11th, dive into our Management Reports badge and master everything you need to know about understanding management reports. We look at the foundations of your reports by looking at the nominal records, how to set these up and how they form the basis of your reporting, before delving into the chart of accounts and configuring that to your needs.
Moving on to the trial balance, balance sheet and profit and loss reports. How to run these for your current financial year and how to run these into the future and for prior years. We'll also show you how to reconcile your aged debtors and creditor reports and how to account for any differences before showing you your business dashboards, the perfect feature for monitoring your key business data at a glance.
Attend 5 out of the 6 sessions and complete our quiz to earn your badge. Your achievement will be added to the Accreditable portal, where you can share your badge with clients, colleagues and suppliers, showcasing your journey to becoming a Sage expert. Don't delay, get yourself registered now at sage.co.uk/webinars and take the next step in your professional development.
Okay, we're back live, so do remember the link. If you are registered, want to get yourself registered for those management report sessions. Loads to go at. As I say, we've run them, some of those sessions we've run quite a few times in the past, but we always get loads of people attending, really positive feedback, helping you to understand the nominal codes area, the nominal ledger, and therefore the management reporting area of your software. So if you've ever had it where you produce a trial balance or a profit and loss report, and maybe you question it yourself or someone else questions where does that figure come from, you'll have a really good understanding. You should be a lot more confident at that point. Now, it does bring us to the end of this afternoon's webinar, so thanks for coming along. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you've got any feedback for us, particularly when we run a session for the very first time, it's always great to receive any feedback that you might have. So if you can take a minute just to complete the survey, thoughts, ideas, topics you'd like to see covered going forward, pop it all on there. It should take you about a minute max. So that should just pop up as you leave. Your follow-up email will be with you in around about an hour's time. So if you need a bit of a recap or you want to get yourself registered for those upcoming sessions, which start, the management reports one starts the week after next. That's on the Monday they start. Copilot, if you're interested in finding out more about that, those sessions start, I think it's Thursday next week. So that will be with you around about an hour's time. So we'll end the webinar just at that point. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you on some other webinars very soon. Many thanks.